All right, we're good.
Huh?
We're live.
All right, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the latest edition of our ERW Revelry here on this Sunday night, June 15th. I'm Kevin Pollock with Emerging Revolutionary War, joined by two Emerging Revolutionary War historians, Dan Davis and Phil Greenwald. How are you guys doing tonight?
Doing well. It's excited to
Doing,
talk about Bunker Hill.
yep, doing good. Happy to be back on a revelry.
Very good. It's good to have you, and that is why we are here. Dan is more than ready to go with the Bunker Hill painting there behind him. He is all set. Will I'm sure touch on that this evening, but yes, that is why we are here talking about the 250th anniversary of the Battle of Bunker Hill, which of course we're 2 days away from, so we're a little bit early, but we only do these on Sunday night. So we're gonna get to cover you and cover everything Bunker Hill related and get you ready for the 250th on Tuesday. And be sure to stay tuned to our Facebook page and our blog as well, emergingrevolutionarywar.org, to talk about that. So we have you two on tonight because you are in the process of working on a Bunker Hill project for Emerging Revolutionary War. So I'm going to let most of you do the talking, and we're going to get into the details of Bunker Hill because I know you guys are right in the middle of it all right now. But go ahead and set the stage for us. Everybody knows Lexington and Concord on April 19th, 1775. What happens just real briefly between April 19th, 1775 and mid-June?
I'll take the Patriot side, and I'll let Dan deal a little bit what the British are doing. But I mean, the big question that everyone has is what's next? I mean, there's been instances where brush-ups have almost happened. They're from New Hampshire. There was shooting before Lexington Concords. They want to say that was the first shots. But everyone remembers what happens in those two Massachusetts towns and along that Battle Road. Uh, Now thousands of militiamen are going to pour into, and the epicenter will be Cambridge, right around Cambridge Common, across from Harvard College. There's a little marker there that says at Jonathan Hastings' house. That's where Artemus Ward will arrive. Poor guy rides 40 some miles with gallstones or bladder stones. Um, this and is met there by seven colonels, six lieutenant colonels of Massachusetts militia, a few guy from Rhode Island is going to show up, guy named Nathaniel Green. He's not going to be there. He'll show up in the days leading or following. Of course, the Connecticut Israel Putnam, and then the never sleeping, ever ubiquitous Dr. Joseph Warren. Warren, though, will do something unique, and he realizes that a revolution or rebellion needs to get the propaganda machine, and so he will have a system committee write down notes and taking accounts of the people who witnessed what happened on April 19th. They'll get local justices to certify them. They'll get them on a ship, get them out through Salem, Massachusetts, sails 3,000 miles to where it's supposed to be given to Ben Franklin. But in the age before telecommunications, Franklin is actually on a ship coming back. And so they hand it to a guy named Arthur Lee, who gets it into the hands of the publisher of a London newspaper who is an enemy of or a political opponent of the administration of Lord North and the King. And so the news of what happens in Lexington Concord is in the paper 6 weeks, 8 weeks after, and it's days before even Gage's uh, aide de camp disembarks from his ship to deliver Gage's official notice of what happened on April 19th. And so that's how, on the bigger spectrum, now the news does go down the coast, and within a few weeks, it reaches as far south into the Carolinas and Georgia, where the Savannah newspaper are publishing it as well by mid-May. And so news spreads that something has happened, and thousands of militiamen are like descending like flies to a light in the summer around the environs of Boston. And so it becomes a siege quickly thereafter, but everyone doesn't really know what's going to happen.
Puts his men on half rations. He has to start reducing rations because they no longer have access to the countryside to for provisions. But what the biggest thing that probably happens during the intervening time between Lexington and Concord and Bunker Hill is that Gage receives reinforcements, specifically three major generals: William Howe, Henry Clinton, John Burgoyne, three men who will go on to play a very critical role in the American Revolution. And I think to a certain degree, when Gage receives those reinforcements, he has Clinton, he has Howe, he has Burgoyne. It buoys the spirits a little bit. in my mind, and that is when he begins making plans to break out of Boston, or at least he hopes to break out of Boston.
You're on mute, Kevin.
That's embarrassing. Nobody wants to hear me anyway. Uh, so looking at the context of the siege of Boston with the strategies of both sides, how do we go from nothing happening to the British trying to break out? Dan, you mentioned the reinforcements, but what is their strategic goal beyond just breaking out, and how do they plan on doing that? And then what do the Americans plan on doing about that?
Gage comes up with a plan for really a two, three-pronged attack. He wants to sweep south across Boston Neck, drive the Patriots out of Roxbury on the mainland, and then seize Dorchester Heights, which we know Washington will eventually do later on the following year. Then he's going to send a second group, or at least the plan is, via boats landing on Charlestown Neck, or rather, the Charlestown.
Upon. And so Artemis Ward and all them do that. So you're looking at June 9th, the plans are already interrupted, and it's on its way to what is happening. Now, for later on, of course, a lot of action will go looking at Dorchester. The British are nervous about Dorchester Heights. If you're familiar with where Dorchester is or not, take a look at any of the historic maps. And Dorchester guards the harbor, and so any artillery pieces up there, which the Americans are very limited at this time, could actually reach down into and make the Royal Navy a precarious situation while I'm stationed there. And so, obviously, Gage is very interested in nullifying that. Luckily, the Americans at that time do not have the infrastructure or the artillery support to do that, but they will get the jump on Charlestown Peninsula to upset the plans that Gage has laid out for that, and they'll do that from Cambridge itself.
All right, so we're gonna get into the battle now a bit more, and I'd say probably, at least amongst our group and certainly people that follow us, probably one of the best known facts about the Battle of Bunker Hill is that it wasn't actually fought on Bunker Hill, but instead Breed's Hill. So Phil, since you're kind of covering more of the American side of things, talking about the importance of those hills overlooking Boston, talk a little bit about the decision to fortify Breed's Hill, which again they mistook as Bunker Hill. And was it the best tactical choice for the American forces, or were there other places that they could have secured and been in a better position to fight the British?
Certainly. I mean, obviously, the goal is Bunker Hill is a little farther back the peninsula, slightly higher elevation as well. And it's known about by the emerging what New England Militia Army or New England Army or the Grand Army, as it's also called at this time, because on April 19th, actually, retreating British soldiers had fortified Bunker Hill. And when they retreat the next day, they actually dismantle those earthworks. And so they do know about it. However, Breed's Hill is very close, only 1 mile from Breed's Hill to Copp's Hill, which is one of the larger eminences in what is Boston proper at the time. Today, of course, and then as well, the famous burial ground right outside the Old North Church. And so Bunker Hill would have been fortified a peninsula, but it would have been a lot closer towards Cambridge. Breed's Hill, a lot closer to the edge of the Charlestown Peninsula. Although there's not a definite account saying that, hey, they did this for that, or they walked by Bunker Hill by accident, or last second Prescott, Richard Gridley, Israel Putnam decided, let's go here. Whatever cause you want to believe or whatever count you want to say is the most accurate, they do prepare at Breed's Hill. And one of the things that Breed's Hill does, which creates a response by the British. Breed's Hill is so close; it's like the proverbial sticking the finger in the nose of the British. You're going to have to do something because the Americans are right there. I mean, within a mile of hill, within less than half mile of the coastline. um, what are you going to do about it? The Americans can get artillery up there of any substantial size, and the British don't know what the Americans have. They could bombard into Boston. They also now control part of the Mystic. It was at the North, or yeah, the Charles, excuse me, wrong city. And and so by building the defenses up there in our earthen redoubt, the Americans are now going to upset any British tactical plans and drive the focus from potentially Dorchester Heights, which is very weak under General John Thomas, the American commander in that sector, and bring the focus back to Charlestown, where they now are preparing a earthen redoubt to welcome any British incursion.
So Dan, what is the British High Command going to do about the Americans sticking their finger in their nose, or
They
toward
got
their
to get
nose, I
the
should say?
yeah. Well, they have to. They, as Phil mentioned, they're going to have to do something. And again, as Phil mentioned, Breeds Hill commands the Charlestown Ferry. It commands the north end. Come up with a plan of action. There's some thought of given to sending an amphibious force up the Bolton's Point, out of the range of the redoubt, and from there they decide they're going to make a frontal assault on the redoubt. William Howe is going to lead the operation. Gage is going to delegate the authority to him. We know Gage goes to Copp's Hill early on that morning to observe the bombardment of the redoubt. He gets a look at the redoubt. Most likely, he probably spends the day at the province house, delegating authority to the three major generals. One other interesting item about the operation that just wasn't reported.
All right, so we've got the. Oh, Phil, do you want to add something?
Just a few one things. We're having technical difficulties, so it's jumping, live streaming and so forth. We are recording this for anyone from the last 5 minutes or so. So I do apologize for that. Not sure why the internet is playing tricks with us, but it's not an ERW live and it's not playing tricks with us as we go. But no, I think one of the accounts, and this is Dan and I've had conversations about this actually while we were in Boston, about a month and a half ago, is that when Clinton's idea of like this amphibious landing, he's going to collect boats by the next morning. Does he mean what morning does he mean? Is he going to take a 24-hour break and then do it, which gives the Americans more defense, or does he mean by that morning, and the tides and so forth? So Clinton's a little ambiguous with that, and his accounts are great. He has a great tactical mind, but sometimes you wonder if his writings are kind of bashing people a little more later in life when he's writing, hey, they should have listened to me for this, 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 and this. And a lot of times he's right, though, especially later in the campaigns in New York and so forth. But here is whether would they've been able to do what they needed to do in the time that Gage is allotted. So something that still debated by historians today.
Yeah, and I'll add to that. And Phil makes a great point about Clinton's writings and his accounts. Is that we have to remember that when the war as the war is coming to a close, that Clinton bears the full responsibility for the loss of America. He has the finger pointed at him. It's not Cornwallis who surrenders at Yorktown. It's Clinton, and Clinton will actually lose his seat in Parliament. He'll get it back later on in life, but he will lose his seat in Parliament because of the loss of America. And we also need to remember too, we're not, as Phil just mentioned, we're not really bashing Clinton. Clinton arguably orchestrated one of the best campaigns of the entire war when he seized Charleston in the spring of 1780.
All right, so we got the British and the Americans up on Charlestown Neck. And I think so often we've talked about or we've heard about the Battle of Bunker Hill as, being these militiamen behind fortifications in lines upon lines upon lines of well-trained, regular British soldiers charging toward the American defenses atop Breed's Hill. Is that exactly true, guys? And how does this battle play out?
So I'll take the first stab. Obviously, is that let's just talk a little bit about like what's the defenses. And so you of course have the earthen fort up top and a redoubt that was constructed pretty much throughout the night. And they refer to it as medium height. There's an account later on of Colonel Prescott, who was a very tall man who is in charge. He's about 6'2" or 3 inches in height, depending on what Dunkin' Donuts he's leaving that day as he goes toward the battlefield. And so you have this medium breastwork that is open at the end, kind of on top, but then off to the American left flank is, of course, the fence line that goes down toward the Mystic River, initially under the command of Robert Knowlton. Um, and as they do, that's where the focus is going to be on the initial British attack. Let's go around, cut the Americans off by the left, get up behind the redoubt, and then press them between the two wings. And so very similar as we see this on a lot of battlefields of the 18th and 19th century is a flanking maneuver and then push up. And so the Americans, though, are going to be reinforced down as Dan's going to share a picture there of from our friends over the American Battlefield Trust. You can see if you look at Hal's name on the right side of the peninsula there, their push is going to go with the Grenadiers initially up toward that rail fence. Not only is Robert Norton one of the best, probably militia officers, they're going to be reinforced by a guy named John Stark, who will pop up a lot of times throughout the rest of the war. And his New Hampshire men, along with Francis Nash, will take defenses along that line and extend it all the way to the Mystic River, especially when the tide starts to go out. In addition, Stark's going to put a stake out about 100 yards and tell his men not to fire until the British reach there. Now, as the initial attacks, and I'll let Dan talk about the British response side, is the Americans are going to um, hold that line, and they are going to reinforce it with freshly cut hay, grasses. They're pulling down other rock fences, so they're going to pile up a defense quickly there, and they are going to between the river and the edge of Breed's Hill create this kind of killing zone, as we call it in modern military parlance, where the British are going to be funneled in. Initially, some of the British units are not even going to deploy out in the line, thinking they can push through directly. And so, with that segue, I'll pass it over to Dan to talk a little bit about the rail fence attack.
Yeah, going back before getting to the rail fence, we want to talk just real briefly about the attack on the American left, the British right. Howe sends his light infantry companies forward in column along the beach of the Mystic River. And historians talk a lot about how Bunker Hill influenced Howe's thinking for the remainder of the war with these flanking maneuvers that he pulled off on Long Island and then at Brandywine. But we also see here that Howe's utilizing his initial, or at least his initial attack, is a flanking maneuver to try to get up the beach of the Mystic River and then get behind Breed's Hill, or the redoubt atop Breed's Hill. What's also interesting about this attack is that Howe is a major general, obviously, and during the attack, he will delegate to his second in command, Robert Pigot. He will give Pigot the left of the line to attack the redoubt, the breastwork, and be part of the rail fence. But Howe himself is going to lead his men forward on foot. Perhaps he thought that he needed to do this to inspire his men, but what you essentially see here on the battlefield is a major general reverting back down to a battalion commander. And I think to a certain degree, had Howe further delegated to one of his subordinates and directed the action from Moulton's Hill, you could probably make the argument that the battle does not go off as it does with the various assaults. There are three separate attacks. What Howe tries to do is eventually, as time goes on, squeeze off and concentrate on the redoubt and try to overwhelm it by force of numbers. The light infantry is going to be repulsed on the beach. The Grenadiers are going to go forward, supported by the 5th and the 52nd Regiments of foot against the rail fence. The Grenadiers, when they get to within probably 90 to 100 yards of the rail fence, they will deploy into a line of battle. That's when Knowlton's men open fire and the men defending the rail fence open fire. And the Grenadiers make the mistake of stopping to return fire, and they're essentially sitting ducks out in the open. What makes it their advance much more difficult is that it's over rising ground, broken ground with brick kilns and fences that they have to maneuver over to get to the rail fence. That attack is going to be repulsed. Pigot is going to go forward. He's going to be repulsed. And Howe's going to write later on that as he watched his men streaming back toward the rear, that it was a moment that he had never felt before, a moment when he had seen the British run from or be repulsed on the after an attack.
All right, so we've got the British troops attacking toward, and of course, eventually, spoiler alert for everybody, will succeed. But how do they succeed there? And when we get to that too, talking about the British victory, what are some of the British maneuvers, I guess? What are some of the tactical blunders as well and successes on both sides that ultimately will influence the outcome of the battle.
I'll give you two tactical blunders, maybe three. One, Howe reverting to a battalion commander. Number two, and then this happens in the second attack as well. The Grenadiers in the 5th and 52nd make another advance against the rail fence and the fleshes that Phil talked about. They stop and return fire, and every time they do that, again, they're just sitting ducks out in the open. For those Patriot muskets. And I think the third thing that happens, and this is talked about in the letter a few days after the battle, is that Howe actually pulls the light infantry companies off of the beach and has them support the attack against the rail fence. And there's some friendly fire casualties that the light companies inflict on the grenadier companies, and that's out of, I think, essentially inexperience.
Phil, how about for the Americans? How do they do fight in this battle?
I mean, from a static defense, I mean, if you use the words of Nathaniel Greene after the battle, wish we could sell the British another hill or such a cost. I mean, initially, the Americans, I mean, do not have the artillery support. I mean, there's a few, even our friend Henry Knox, who later on tries to bring the siege train, apparently is going to launch some shells closer to Roxbury. There are some artillery pieces, force, what, 6 pounders or so forth, I think the Americans have that they try to fire at Copp's Hill or something, fall short. And apparently, Burgoyne laughs at them, and the British run. So there's no artillery support for the Americans. There's also, you see, in a fledgling army like this, there are going to be things that are forgotten that, oh, I thought you were doing. No, you were supposed to. They issue them rations and before they leave Cambridge Common, or they say they do, but the men don't have food and water with them. And you figure a lot of these men have been up since the night before. They built an earthwork. They've survived whatever bombardment. They're now facing the British, and they're hungry and they're thirsty. So I mean, that, as the great Napoleon would say, after this war, a army marches on its stomach. Well, it's got to eat to fight as well. They also start to run out of ammunition as well. At times, actually, Prescott will order his men to stop firing, which will precipitate another British advance, thinking the Americans are effectively running out of ammunition, and that's exactly what they do. Not a lot of these militiamen, if they all have bayonets, everyone is fearful of the British bayonet. They'll see that at few instances throughout the war. Um, the tactical, I mean, I think the Americans do as great as they can tactically in a static defense. But what they fail at is everything that a professional arm, kind of everything a professional army has done well is logistics, the behind the scenes, this, I mean, the support stuff that is needed. But what you see here as well is defining which will save America, many of battlefields is individual personal leadership that rises up to understand what it takes to be a battlefield leader. From Stark putting a stake in the ground prior to assaults, to Knowlton, to even Prescott, who after one of the first artillery shells kills a young soldier, will actually stand up on the earthwork and walk back and forth as the British are bombarding, showing that it's not as dangerous, and that this is a freak incident. He also tells them not to bury the body there, but to get the body away because he doesn't want the body to be put in the ground and people to see what it looks like to hit by a 20 some pound shell. And so that is, I think, one of the things that and Prescott does well, along with Stark, Knowlton, and other ones, is the individual leadership. And I'm leaving out Warren, of course, because I'm sure we'll talk about him. And the reason why that guy is there in the earthwork is absurd. So, but yeah, the Americans are great until you can't fire anymore.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
definitely a big problem for sure. So with some of the excellent American leadership that you see and some of the questionable decisions that you see on the part of the British, is it simply just a lack of ammunition on the part of the Americans that comes back to bite them and allows the rest of the British attacks to succeed throughout the day, or is it something more than that?
I think it's a lot. I
Right.
think it's
I'll
a
take the. I
lot
mean,
of
yeah,
yeah.
it's the. I mean, we always get this mindset like the British are have a T set and they're marching up the hill. Um, we're also, I mean, understand like and how and you see this in every major war is that the it takes a while for these officers to start to command and understand. I mean, Hal and other ones are learning their commands. The Americans are learning obviously their commands as well. These are militia, these are farmers, and so forth. Um, but I think the British quickly understand. I mean, this lesson is a lesson learned on the field that the Americans behind the defense. Um, I think, as Percy said after April 19th, they have men that know what they are about. And that is exactly reinforced here on June 17th, of what's going on. And even the retreat, I mean, is later that day as well. But there are men that hold up at Bunker Hill or Fort Putnam, another one that they built on a small crest. So even as they retreat, and apparently Prescott will even go back and reminisces. I know our friend Mark Malloy would love this because I'm mentioning Gettysburg. But like the soldiers of Pickett's division after they leave the field, Prescott apparently tells Ward, give me three regiments with bayonets, and I will go back and take that hill. And so, luckily, if it ever happens, Ward, thinking more strategically, big picture, denies Prescott the use of three more regiments. So the fight is still in some of these men. Um, but I mean, and the British are not going up with tea sets. Hal's not having a tea party or whatever else that pictures show. And these men, yeah, are fighting 18th century warfare against what they think is a rabble force of rebels. And they have to learn by that second and third assault that no, these men know what they are. They have leaders who know what they are about.
Yeah, and I'll just tip in on Phil's point about the inexperience. How's getting to know his men. The light companies, the Grenadier companies, they had previously fought during on April 19th at Lexington and Concord and along Battle Road. And this is the second time that they're brigaded together into battalions, and this is their second battle together. So they are still learning, and thus, that is illustrated by the friendly fire incident during one of the assaults.
All right, so we're getting to the battle. I want to do some big picture stuff too about what Bunker Hill does. But Phil, since you mentioned it and talking about sort of the end of the battle, talk about Joseph Warren. Obviously, an important character that finds himself in the midst of the Battle of Bunker Hill. Talk about his role in all of this as well.
Uh, Excellent. Yeah, I will. Sorry, the flipping of the screen caught me there for a second. Um, Warren, I don't think he sleeps from like 1773 to his death here on June 17th. I mean, unfortunately loses his wife, has what, three or four small children, three, four small children. He's head of the provincial congress. He's a militia officer. He does what he does on April 20th when everyone else leaves for the Continental Congress in Philadelphia. He's left in charge. He's the one that sends out, of course, William Dawes and that other guy, Paul Revere. There he is. There's Warren himself. A great friend of ours, historian, author, Christian Despina, wrote his bio on him called The Founding Martyr, and I think that's very accurate. Warren is a very intelligent guy. He is also a medical doctor. Um, and he, unfortunately for him, suffers migraines, and so he's actually sleeping, trying to sleep off a migraine in the morning of June 17th. When he hears what's going on, he is woken up and will leave the Jonathan Hastings house and arrive there at the earthwork, where Prescott graciously will offer him command, saying that you are a major general in the Massachusetts militia, and Warren will beg off of it, saying, "I came just today as a volunteer or a common soldier." Um, Warren and Prescott are one of the last few to leave the back of the quadrangle earthwork of the on top of Breed's Hill. Um, when he is shot and in the face, in the skull, and then will be bayoneted multiple times. To the point where it's probably he is unrecognizable because of his wounds, and the British are knowing who he is, and so now there is down in Jamaica Plains a marker for him, but his body, skull, and so forth has been reinterred a few times since the battle. There is a marker on the part of land that is saved, saying where Joseph Warren fell, and then unfortunately it's not there right now, but it used to be near one of the buildings along the edge of Breed's Hill was a small little bronze monument of Warren himself. The alcove is still there; you can still see that where it once stood. But yeah, Warren is a tragic loss. Not only he's also related to the to the Warren. I mean, he's his fingers are everywhere. I mean, he's the orator of the at the time when there is the Boston Tea Party. He's the one speaking there as well. He is an amazing guy that would have probably risen up through high up into the ranks of the Continental leadership if he lives. And unfortunately, that American spirit of being a volunteer, he shows up, and because of his care for the men leaving the back of the earthwork, he decides to stay around and unfortunately receives this fatal wound.
All right, so we've got the British attacks having succeeded, driven the Americans off of um, Breed's Hill itself, and of course the British are going to suffer very high casualties in this fight, over 1,000 as compared to just about 400 American casualties themselves. But Dan, from the British perspective, how does this high casualty rate at Bunker Hill, especially among the officers that they lose, affect their strategic planning and what they think about the American forces, especially because it doesn't break the siege of Boston at all? So what happens with the British planning from here? And again, how is their thinking impacted by what they've just done at Bunker Hill?
Well, yeah, we talked a little bit about that earlier, where how it certainly influences Howe's thinking, um, especially with how he conducts his campaigns later on in the war, 1776, 1777, before he eventually leaves after Burgoyne's surrender at Saratoga and relinquishes command to Henry Clinton. It absolutely affects his mindset. He begins utilizing, and again, he tried to utilize a flanking maneuver at Bunker Hill. He's going to keep going back to that, playing that card again at Brandywine and at Long Island later on during the war. One of the more interesting things from the aspects strategically is that, as you mentioned, it doesn't break the siege of Boston, but I think it really emphasizes the fact that this is now a full-blown shooting war in the minds of the British High Command in Boston. I think after Lexington and Concord, what I think to a certain degree, Gage was possibly holding on to a little bit of hope that there might be some type of reconciliation, that the two sides could come to an agreement at the peace table. Bunker Hill completely obliterates any idea that this is going to be nothing but a prolonged, protracted war. I think one of the things that you also see at Bunker Hill that you see on other battlefields of the American Revolution is sort of this tunnel vision on the part of the British leadership. They have to take, rather than they focus on the effort at hand, they have to take the readout on Breed's Hill. They have to drive the Americans off of Breed's Hill. There's no plans or secondary plans to destroy the force on Charlestown Peninsula, and you see that throughout the war, where there's this failure to recognize by the British High Command that you have to destroy the army. The army is the heart of independence. If you destroy the army, independence is going to the cause is going to start to wither away. And I think the British have an opportunity to do that early on in the war, but they are just never able to land that crushing blow, despite Howe's efforts in New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania later on. He's never able to land that crushing blow against the American army.
Yeah, just I mean, I think I want to piggyback a little off of Dan there as well. Is that not only there's this quasi what's is this really a full blown rebellion? Is this just a minor curtain like the Gage can maneuver? But you also see a change in the British leadership. I mean, Lord Dartmouth will leave, and George Germain, which militarizes more. Germain, of course, had served in the military, had that hiccup there at, I think, what, Minden or something
Yep.
under the Duke of Marlborough. But you see the British, okay, now we are going to have a more of a aggressor as the Secretary of the American Colonies, who's going to be overcharged. Instead of Dartmouth, who's a little more passive in his leadership. The king, of course, then rejects the olive branch petition and so forth in the coming months. But yeah, that what next thing as well. Bunker Hill also sets up kind of the American, or especially George Washington, for a little bit of failure because the Continental side gets the idea that we'll put the name Continental Army on this group of men, but we will rely on militia. Look what militia can do. We can call up units. We can have shorter enlistments. We won't be like the British where we have these standing armies. And Washington is going to rail against that for, I mean, pretty much the entire war, saying that we need an army in the field. We just can't every year raise it. And so Bunker Hill says, yeah, like if the British are going to be strong enough to continue to attack hills, then yeah, maybe the militia is the way we go. But we can't always expect the enemy to do what we want them to do. And Howe and all of them is going to learn. You see that in New York and other places where they do these flanking maneuvers, or they look at the topography and the geography, and they go through small passes along the New York Peninsula. And so this American hope of them charging straight up into the prepared entrenchments where militia can stand and pick them off like you did at Bunker Hill sets an unrealistic expectation for the rest of the war. And Washington, who's actually on his way to Massachusetts at this time when the battle is fought, is going to get here after that euphoria and then go, all right, what next? And pitch around after arriving at the Hastings house. And but the other thing too is you see also in this intervening time on the tactical sense is the that Ward, Artemis Ward, will within the end by the end of the siege give up and resign because of the ill health and because of his he believes lack of ability, and so that promotes a guy what's his name, Charles Lee, who we may hear about later in the war, to that second in command, which of course has all their tremors through. So you start to see the removal of some officers on the American side, the death of some officers, but also this vision that Bunker Hill is not is going to be the example we want to emulate, not the outlier that it will be.
So what does Bunker Hill do for the common soldier of both sides in terms of morale? I know it's harder to gauge that with scarcity, or not a scarcity, but less sources, diaries, letters, things like that from a common British soldier and common Americans as well. But is there any feel for how the fighting at Bunker Hill impacts them, both in the short term and the long term?
Well, I mean, I'll take that. There are some accounts that hate of, I mean, that baptism of fire, the common soldier, and I depicted what's a larger, or I'm sorry, what is a better defeat in American military history on land. I mean, not like Pearl Harbor or so forth. That is on land that has a better outcome for the cause than Bunker Hill. I mean, you put that in the list of like American battles that say you ask anyone on the street if they've heard of Bunker Hill. Yes, they may not be able to tell you the details, but they've heard of Bunker Hill. And so that also is that baptism of fire, the belief in the militia, the soldiers that fight there. There are accounts of growing up. I mean, some of these guys are as young as 17, 18 years old, and now they have tested their mettle against the British. And so the accounts you read of, and then one's coming back when they set the memorial stones there in the 1820s, and their accounts of how much the pride is of standing there at the earthwork 50 years, what, yeah, 50 some years around prior to. And so the one account is escaping me from one of the soldiers, which is he talks about how Bunker Hill taught him the lesson once he and of manhood and so forth. But that is the account that the Americans will signify that Bunker Hill is a one of those glorious defeats, Pyrrhic victories for the British that will be talked about around campfires for the months to come during the siege of Boston.
Yeah, it's a gruesome introduction to the reality of war for many of the British soldiers. British added to that to surviving the battle. Ultimately those that survive, the British hold the ground after the fighting. They are left to bury the dead and to deal with the casualties and moving the casualties off the battlefield back to Boston, and again burying the dead. So it's a very brutal reality. And we also have to look at this too. The 23rd Regiment of Foot, their light company fought in this battle. That regiment will serve for the duration of the war and surrender at Yorktown. So it's a beginning of a very, very long, protracted war for the British soldiers. Although obviously they can't see that yet.
All right, so we got just a few minutes left. I want to jump a little bit further ahead from 1775 with Bunker Hill. As Phil mentioned, it is a well-known fight in American history, not just for us historians, but for common Americans as well. And Dan, you've got the painting behind you that I'm sure many kids recognize in their American history textbooks growing up through elementary and middle and high school as well. But despite that, there's not much to see at Bunker Hill or really Breed's Hill today. Of course, it's a small parcel that's owned by the National Park Service. You have the monument or the tower as well that you can see there in Charlestown. The National Park Service has a nice little visitor center nearby. But since you guys are writing a book on Bunker Hill, and one of the key pieces of an ERW book is not only writing about the story, but also getting people to those sites. What's your favorite site to go and visit related to the Battle of Bunker Hill?
I'll do um
And you can't say Warren
two.
Tavern.
Can't say weren't.
No, okay.
That's after. That's after the visiting. You go down the hill. I mean, it's getting to the point where the little marker is for the rail fence, which is
Yep.
pretty unique because you can see the contours of the land as well as what the British are approaching. Because I still think one of the things that we have to do in these books or as historians is to kind of push back on that this is level ground, a manicured lawn going up to Bunker Hill, or these are manicured fields where like that, where not even though it's a peninsula, there it is a rolling terrain, and so that plays an effect as well. So that marker there, and seeing the farm lane that it's on, even though it's just a marker where that lane was. And then what I like about writing Bunker Hill, like I try to look at the positive of, yeah, there's only a few acre parcel left and a lot of it's developed. And so, but when you come across from the north end of Boston, and you usually bear to the right to go toward where the Charlestown Navy Yard is, right there is the what, Three Cranes Tavern, which is sitting down, or the foundation is, and that is burnt during the bombardment. So it looks like just a little park right in front of you, but you can actually stand in, and they have it marked off where the different rooms were. You can stand in one of the building's foundations that was a casualty of the war, and it brings it home of what that Charlestown, yeah, might have been pretty much evacuated by the time of June 1775, but these are still people's homes. This is their livelihoods. This is where they grew up. This is where their families are buried, and now a major battle between the warring colonies and rebellious colonies and the British Empire are going to come straight through. And due to the British being nervous that this would be used for snipers and skirmishers, they'll fire into the town to burn it. And so that's a cool little spot there. And then when you're sitting there, ironically, if you stand there, you can look straight across the street and there's a craft beer restaurant. And so I feel like at least Charlestown has incorporated that. Hey, you burn one tavern, we will build another one. And so I'm not sure if anything speaks higher to the American spirit than that. So.
Or ERW spirit. Dan, how
Yeah,
about you?
yeah, I agree with Phil. It's the rail fence marker at the Bunker Hill Burying Ground in Charlestown. You can still follow the British despite the development. You can still see, as Phil mentioned, you can plainly make out the rise in the ground coming up from the Charlestown Navy Yard. You get a pretty clear path moving through the streets of the British, at least part of the British attacks, and you can still follow it from where they land at the Navy Yard and walk up to the Bunker Hill Monument. But obviously, it's the landscape is now dotted with houses and businesses.
Yeah, certainly an unfortunate thing, but you can't win them all, I guess, when it comes to preservation exactly. So one last question I'll throw at you guys, softball question. If you can talk about what's the status of the book? Where are you at with the book? I know some people like to hear of like how a book is made. They don't just suddenly appear on a bookshelf. So how's the process going with the book? And yeah, just anything you can tell us about the process of the book right now.
So it would be nice if you could just snap the fingers and it'd be there. But um, well, so the book is, yeah, not the cop out here, is in progress, but the goal is to have it to so the way Dan and I are doing it, we're kind of writing the different sections, the Patriot or the American side, and then the British, and then we combine it. When we collaborated on a few projects for that other war, the Civil War, we did, of course, the Federals and Confederates, and so we found that was a great way to divide it. And so research is done, pictures are done. For the most part. I mean, they're at least taken and so forth. And so now we're looking for the historic images, which is can be hard and difficult, especially some of them are copyrighted paintings, etc. But the goal, we're still on track to have everything to the first round of editors, the historical content editor, who looks at for historical accuracy, and then to the series editor, kind of looks at, make sure that we know how to spell the word "the" or something like that, and then so that'll go to the fall, and then our goal is that on I think there's a holiday that some of our ERW people celebrate in mid-March, but it's also called Evacuation Day in Boston, is to have the book out for that day, and that way we are not only just covering Bunker Hill, but we're covering through the siege of Boston. So we incorporate Dorchester Heights, have a little bit of writing on the Knox siege train, and some of the other things that are going on. So that way it'll be a guide from picking up from Lexington and Concord, the book Single Blow. This book will take you all the way through to another volume that is going to be written down the road, and that is when the British leave Boston and go to New York and through the New York campaign. So that way you'll have an ERW series book published by Ted Savas, Savas Beatty from Lexington and Concord all the way up through New York in the next few years. So that way you can tour it all during the America's 250th.
Yeah, and I'll echo that. Plugging away. For those interested, the light infantry just, from my perspective, the light infantry has been repulsed on the beach. So moving up to the plane and the attack on the rail fence, the first one.
Very good. I know it's eagerly anticipated by myself, certainly, and readers of ERW, but obviously no pressure. All good things take time, especially when it comes to writing books. So the sand in the hourglass is running low, and the beer in my glass is running low as well. So we're almost at an hour, but is there anything we didn't get to talk about tonight that you guys won't be able to sleep not having talked about it this evening about the Battle of Bunker Hill? Anything that we left out that you really want to throw in there to talk about? There's only so much we can
Actually,
cover in 45, 60 minutes.
Actually, so this is kind of neat after the battle, and of course memorialization. We've done about how much the land is not there anymore, so forth. But actually, in 1820s, when a parcel of land became available for sale, the landowner was going to sell it for development. A group got interested in it, and as they're collaborating on how to save and create the Bunker Hill Memorial Association, Dr. John C. Warren, the nephew of the fallen Dr. Warren, will actually put up the money to buy those first few acres of the battlefield. The next year, the Bunker Hill Memorial Association is founded. And always feel sorry for the one guy that's in this group because if I read the names for those that are interested in American history, obviously Dr. Warren is going to pop out as the nephew of Dr. Joseph Warren. But the other three guys that make up the initial group is Congressman Daniel Webster, who later becomes, of course, senator. Harvard professor Edward Everett, if you recognize that name from what I believe the Gettysburg Address, the guy who speaks before Lincoln. And then it's a merchant, Thomas Perkins, along with Warren. So Perkins got to feel a little slighted, I guess, being in that group of well-known people that through history. But yeah, memorialization, it's a cool story of how that monument comes to be. And I'll give you one more little tidbit before I let Dan talk. But it is actually they wanted the monument to be 220 feet tall, so they planned for it, but it's actually 221.5 feet tall because they forgot to count the mortar in between the stone, the granite blocks, and that added a foot and a half to it. So someone's like, "Oh, well, you can just put stone on top of stone, right? Granite block? No, you need mortar." So it actually made it official height is 221.5. So there's your trivia question answer for the next time you're at a brewery trivia, and you want to impress your friends with your knowledge.
I hate heights, and I feel terrible climbing up that monument anyway. But I'm definitely glad they put the mortar in.
Yeah.
It's even though it's not quite a round number. So Dan, anything for you?
Yeah, one of the British officers who plays a very prominent role in the first couple months of the war, Major John Pitcairn. One of my favorite stories from Bunker Hill. Really cool story. He's a commander of the 1st Marine Battalion. He gets to Boston in December of 1774. Billets with the family in the city, not too far away from Paul Revere. Regularly attends services at Christ Church. We know it today is Old North Church in Boston's North End. He is there on Lexington Green on the morning of April 19th, 1775, and the first shots are fired. He's going to be mortally wounded during the attack, the final attack on the redoubt. He's taken back over to Boston. He dies in Boston later on, and he's interred. He's buried in the crypt beneath in the Old North Church. So you can go pay your respects to John Pitcairn. The other cool part of that about that story is that the Pitcairn and those Civil War folks who watch this, you'll know where I'm going with this. Pitcairn billeted with a family named Shaw. The patriarch was I think the fourth great grandfather of Robert Gould Shaw. So there's a Bunker Hill and Civil War connection that I find is really cool.
It's amazing with all those connections. Daniel Webster, Edward Everett, Robert Gould Shaw, all these everything seems to intersect in the history field, that's for sure. Uh, well, guys, if there's not anything more that you want to add, we'll go ahead and call it a wrap. Thanks for coming on to share the work that you've been doing about the Battle of Bunker Hill to prepare us for the 250th anniversary of that battle. Again, that's going to be this Tuesday on June 17th, 2025. So, everybody that's following and watching this, stay tuned again to our social media channels, our YouTube channel, Facebook as well. We'll be providing some videos covering the 250th anniversary of the Battle of Bunker Hill, as well as plenty of content on our blog as well at emergingrevolutionarywar.org. We'll have plenty of 250th content coming to you, not just on Tuesday, but over the coming years as we commemorate the 250th anniversary of the American Revolution with Emerging Revolutionary War. So, Dan and Phil, thank you again very much for joining us this evening. And everybody, thanks for tuning in and watching. And we hope to see you soon out on some of these Revolutionary War battlefields and sites as we commemorate the 250th anniversary.
Have a good night. Thank you.
Take care.